Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So we got a lot that we want to cover today. Today we're talking about overcoming hesitations to unleash the power of Google Analytics 4. Just to give you a quick idea of who I am, my name is Sandra Elliott. I am the Director of Training and Development here, and the marketing team here has graciously offered to allow me to moderate this webinar. I'm really excited to bring in the two people that we're going to be talking to. I'll introduce those other two to you here in just a second. But before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are. Adswerve is a Google Marketing, Analytics, and Cloud partner. We are really well known in that area. We are the leading, and as you can see, we work with a lot of big names here. We're the largest independent Google Marketing Platform partner. We have a team of over 200 leaders and platform experts. And I've been in this field for a little while, and I can tell you that working here, I am working with the best in the industry. I'm really, really proud of the fact that we have a 99% customer satisfaction rating. We've got over 450 agencies that work with us, and you can see that we're a partner with a lot of different groups here. So let me just take a moment. I'm going to turn off my camera now so that you can focus on the people who are actually going to be doing the presentation today. I'm going to start by introducing you to Emmilly Best. Emmilly is a senior analytics manager here at Adswerve. She's based in San Diego. She has over 6 years of experience in data analytics and has worked with a lot of different industries, as you can see here. She's also certified in Google Analytics, Google Analytics 4, Google Tag Manager, and a few other things. Her specialty here is strategy, process, and scalability. And I think you'll see that she has a lot to tell you about how to get ready for GA4. Really, really good stuff. We also have Luka. And Luka, I didn't even ask you how you say your last name. Can you tell me how you say your last name?
It's Cempre.
Okay, thank you. Luka's based in Bend, Oregon, and has been playing. I love the idea of playing with Google Analytics and BigQuery exports for close to a decade at this point. He's also Google Cloud certified, so he's a cloud database engineer and a professional data engineer. So with that, I'm going to tell you these are the things that we're going to talk about. I did my intro for you. We're going to go straight into GA4 important dates and topics with Emmilly. And then we're going to talk about GA4 and BigQuery with Luka. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A. Before I jump into the discussion, I just want to tell you the Q&A is open, and we have a lot of people who are here right now from Adswerve to help answer your questions. So even if you have some deeper technical questions, those kinds of things, we might have somebody on the line that can answer it. And if we don't have somebody on the line that can answer it, we will take that question. We'll see what we can do to get it answered for you. Okay, so Emmilly, I will do the slides. Why don't you just go ahead and take over and let me know what you need.
Awesome, thank you, and thank you for the introduction. So this section here, we're going to talk about important dates for GA4, and then also just important topics that I've been hearing a lot from our clients. So going with the theme of this webinar is, we've been hearing that there are some hesitations with moving forward with the GA4. So really wanted to address these hesitations here and talk through how we can address them further. So one thing I'm hearing from clients is that it's too much work to migrate over to GA4. Maybe they have competing priorities or other big changes happening in their organization, or there's just not the bandwidth or the resources to address it. Other things we're hearing is we just don't know where to start, right? A lot of people have experience with universal analytics, and maybe starting over with GA4 is scary to them, or maybe they just don't like how GA4 looks or functions because it's just not what they're used to. And then lastly, people are just anticipating a lot of questions from various members of their organization. Maybe it's from executives who use the higher level data, or maybe it's from analysts or marketers who need to use this data day to day to make certain decisions. Unfortunately, I can't make some of these hesitations go away, but I think with some planning and process and communication, we can help ease some of these hesitations. And then just making sure that we have the deprecation dates top of mind here. So we have the enterprise version of Universal Analytics going away next year. So there are still some time to dedicate to the migration.
And I realize I may have accidentally skipped your poll. I certainly didn't mean to. Let me
No,
find
it's a few slides down, so we're good to go.
Okay, good. Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So these are the countdown dates that we have for standard Google Analytics and then also for enterprise Google Analytics here. So about a month left for standard, and then we'll have about a year left for the enterprise. I also wanted to shout out the GA4 ebook that was released earlier this month. I found this quote to be really helpful in terms of framing our conversation today. So here, although it might be tempting to replicate or lift and shift what you have in Universal Analytics, that's not really the way that I would recommend moving forward. Granted, if that's all that you have time for, or that's all you have bandwidth for, that's perfectly fine too, because that's getting started, right? But really taking this time, if you are an enterprise user and you have a year to go, to start thinking about it as a clean slate and really build the analytics strategy with the future in mind, encompassing app tracking if you have apps, machine learning, and then also really just enforcing this privacy first mindset that the industry is going in. Now it's time for the poll. So we just wanted to reach out to everyone in the crowd to see where they're at right now in their migration process. And we'll just give everyone a few minutes to get their answers in.
We're getting a lot of people answering super fast. That's great. We've already got over 50% that have voted. So these are interesting, really interesting. More people are done and ready than I would have expected. We're almost at 75% of people answering. As soon as we get 75%, I will go ahead and pop it out and let you see it. Okay, I'm going to close that poll. Did it give me a chance to share it? Yeah, there we go. Share results. Can everybody see those results now? That's what you're seeing, Emily. Look at how many people say they're done and ready.
That's awesome. They're probably here to tune into Luka's section then, but hopefully they can still glean something from my section of the webinar. Great. So here is what I recommend in terms of process and strategy is just starting off with a really good game plan. So establishing those timelines, right? Knowing what important dates are in terms of Google Analytics deprecation, but also maybe building out some internal timelines as well, you know, certain milestones, where we want to be in Q3, where we want to be in Q4, that type of thing is going to be really helpful in terms of getting you to where you want to go. Next would be determining priorities. So what is critical information for you to have in GA4? Is it form submits, purchases, something like that? Making sure that you have that ready to go compared to maybe some other tracking that is not as critical. And then just making sure that you have the right people involved in these decisions or these discussions early on will be really helpful in terms of getting a good foundation in place and then not having to come back and do some rework. Next is defining success metrics. So what does success look like for this migration? How can we measure that, right? So, you know, Universal Analytics, what you have now, was not built in a day, right? It's been built over years. And so kind of just taking that mindset and thinking about that for GA4. Like, what do you need today and what can you build on for the future? Next here is just getting started, right? I think that's kind of the biggest hurdle. I really recommend a phased approach. So what is the MVP? What is the least effort you need to put in to get your critical information? And then what is the MVP plus? What are things that would be nice to have that can come later? And then from there, you can start to customize and optimize your GA4, whether it's with tracking or reporting or just how you're visualizing your data. And then also with training, right? So making sure that day-to-day users are trained, but then also other parts of the organization are trained up enough to start using this information. And then lastly, all good plans don't always go according to plan, right? So just making sure you have a backup plan. Again, it's just the least amount of information and effort you need before deprecation dates. Here are some sample timelines that we recommend. So for standard users, you're going to have that cutoff date, which is that orange line at the end of June before going into July. And these are the phases that we recommend before you get to that point. I'll go through these phases in the next few slides, but just wanted to visualize really just going through. You don't need to have everything done by then, but just going through the first few sections. In the next slide, that's an example again for 360 users. It might look pretty similar, and this is just because I know that the natural tendency is for a lot of procrastination. So maybe if you think, I have a year, right? Why do I need to do all of this right now? Well, the benefit of doing a lot of this right now is that if you have your data and everything in place by the end of June, you'll have a whole year's worth of data to compare against by the deprecation date next year. And thank you. Yeah, and then this one just shows that GA360 users have more time to build out any customizations and optimizations going forward. Awesome. So going through the migration phases, like I mentioned before, first is the research and planning phase. So really at a high level, just learning about GA4 and what's changing. You're already here, so that's already the first step. And then just trying to understand how that's going to affect your tracking and reporting in the future. Maybe starting to ask questions and having conversations about GA4 now. And then thinking about the event tracking strategy you want moving forward, as well as the account structure you want moving forward. For standard users, the account structure will be pretty similar to Universal Analytics. And then for 360 users, you'll have a few more options, like with subproperties. Next phase is going through implementation. Like I mentioned before, it's really helpful just to get started. So creating your GA4 property to begin with, maybe a subproperty if that's relevant for you. Implementing and QAing priority tracking. So that would be like page views and key events, maybe conversion events, which are goals. And then also just starting to explore the interface, clicking around, trying to understand that data, and then really trying to see where that knowledge gap is so that you can go from there. After that is just adding any custom configurations. So it might be adding filters to subproperties. It could also be adding the custom parameters, which are custom dimensions, basically. Determining and registering your conversion events, which are equivalent to goals. And then creating audiences, segments, and comparisons as needed so you can start to really analyze your data. And then also configuring any product integrations that you might need as they become available to you. Next here is starting to look at the reports and dashboarding. So there are various reports that are out of the box in GA4 right now that you can use. But if there's anything that you can't find or you're in the interface itself, you can customize the interface, which is new. Compared to Universal Analytics. You can also create Explore reports. You can create dashboards outside of the UI in Looker Studio. And again, just learning the tools, asking questions, analyzing your Universal and GA4 data, finding any missing data points or anything that looks weird, and then trying to update tracking and fix that before deprecation dates. Once you have all of that set up, it's time to really analyze your data and use it moving forward, right? So all of that lays the foundation for getting comfortable with GA4 and trying to start to use it as your source of truth as much as possible. A lot of that can come with communications internally, right? So as you're trying to make that switch to GA4 being your source of truth, that might need to have conversations with leadership, with other members in your organization, to kind of prep them for that and prep them for maybe some changes they'll see, right? So maybe they really care about sessions, and that's not going to be as prevalent or important in GA4. So just having that conversation with them will help them get primed for that. Also here is just identifying some advocates that can help you with those conversations. Yeah, sorry. And then just further adoption, right? Like I mentioned, it's one thing to adopt something in maybe the analytics department, but making sure that you can get that adoption to other areas of the organization. And again, that might just come through training, conversations, and then also FAQs. Maybe that's Q&A sessions or working sessions, or just like a document that houses a lot of questions that you can answer at scale. Cool. And lastly, just advanced configuration and further adoption of GA4. This is not an exhaustive list and is completely optional depending on how you want to use GA4, right? But just like with Universal Analytics, there are options for measurement protocol, data import, various APIs, and then linking to key products like BigQuery, which Luka will mention in the next section, all the different ways that you can get started there. And then lastly, like I mentioned in the game plan, just always having a backup plan, right? So these are absolute dates that you need to have the bare minimum by if you want to have 12 months of data, if you want to have 6 months of data. And this is for 360 users because they do have a little bit more time. And then for standard users, it's kind of just getting started now. Maybe you'll have 30 days worth of data, but that's still better for comparisons than nothing. Awesome. I will hand it off to Luka.
Before we hand it off to Luka, I do have some questions directly related to GA4. So I'm going to ask you those questions, and Luka, please feel free to step in. Are there plans to allow duplications of sub-properties that include dimensions and metrics?
Did you say duplications, like copies?
Yeah, duplications of sub-properties.
I would say that I haven't heard of that in terms of anything that is on the roadmap.
Okay. Roll-up properties. Somebody answered this in there, but I thought maybe other people might be interested in it. When will we be able to add more than 50 properties? Do you know?
I believe that Google has been gathering feedback from resellers like us and clients alike. Again, they've increased certain settings for other things. So I don't think that's totally out of the picture, but I haven't heard of that specific on the roadmap yet, but I can look into that.
Okay. We have a couple of other questions in there that are bigger. Like one is asking why session data doesn't match GA4 versus UA. So I encourage the Adswerve people, pick up those questions, see what you can do to help them find the answers to that. There might be a nice support article that covers those things. So we'd love it if you could add those. I will now mute myself, and I'm going to pass this on to Luka.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll be covering overcoming GA4 and BigQuery integration concerns. Basically, we'll look at a few hesitations, a few things that may be holding you back from turning on that BigQuery export and starting to use the export in BigQuery. And we'll see how best to overcome it, what to do to tackle it. And that can be with a small team, with someone who's not versed in SQL, or with BigQuery SQL professionals as well. And first, we'll start with a quick poll again. So the few hesitations that we will address are around cost, around just sheer complexity of turning the BigQuery and any fear that may be there, any SQL knowledge issues, maybe you're not turning it on because you're scared of, I need to have someone on the team that knows SQL very well, time, or maybe you're doing it already. So it looks like the votes are coming in. We are at 40%, and it looks like almost 40% of our attendees are already exporting. But it looks like out of the issues that there were listed, billing costs seems to be the biggest right now. We're still waiting for votes to come in, but that's good to know. It's going to help me lead the next few minutes of this webinar.
I'll give it just another minute to see if anyone else. We've got 54% who have voted. So, well, there we go. It's picking up again. Look at that. Yeah, I'm surprised how many people are already doing it. That's great.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna get 1 more percent. Oh, there we go. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll and share those results.
So yeah, it looks like it stabilized a little bit from the start, but about a third are already doing it, which on the other hand means that 2/3 of our attendees are not taking advantage of it yet. So the biggest hesitation seems to be cost, but they're all pretty equally spread. So it'll be interesting to see, and hopefully after this, you'll feel more empowered to turn it on. And let's go back to the slides. So as mentioned, we'll look at the cost, see if BigQuery will be expensive and what can be done to maybe keep it at bay. We'll look at complexity, how to connect it. Is it hard? What the schema looks like. I'll also touch some of the changes between Universal Analytics and now Google Analytics 4. And then for the last one, we'll dive into SQL. Can it even be done without it? Does it make sense to have an export if you don't know SQL? And again, hopefully at the end, these will just be bumps that you can skip. So let's start with the cost. So there's a lot of concern that turning on BigQuery, starting Google Cloud Platform, adding your credit card could lead to massive cost. There can of course also be mistakes that happen that are going to bring up the charges. But luckily, Google Analytics 4 and then GCP allows you to start with a BigQuery sandbox. What it means is that you don't even have to connect your Google Cloud Platform with a billing account with a credit card. You can start for free. That of course comes with some limitations. So you get 10 gigabytes of storage. Roughly that means about 10 million events. My calculation there was about a kilobyte per event. Generally that number, the kilobyte number, is smaller, so you probably will get a lot more than just 10 million events, but that's a pretty conservative estimate. On top of that, you also get a terabyte of free processing, which means that you can write queries up to 1 terabyte, and queries are calculated by the amount of data scanned. So if you're doing select stars on 10 gigabytes of data, you can run 100 of those. But very likely you'll just be selecting a few columns, a few dimensions. Maybe you'll be trying to calculate a few metrics out of that, and your queries will be a lot smaller. So that will bring the queries that you can run probably into a few thousand if your size is about 10 gigabytes. And that's all within the sandbox. There are of course limitations of the sandbox. So there's a default expiration that's set to 60 days. So you'll lose your tables after 60 days unless you export them, store them otherwise, or switch to an actual billing account. There can be no streaming into the sandbox. So even with Google Analytics 4, you get daily exports. So every morning you should get an export of your BigQuery data from the previous day. And then you also have an option to get streaming turned on, where you're getting event data from Google Analytics 4 to BigQuery within a few seconds. However, that's not available in Sandbox. You can also not use DML, SQL, and you'll get an annoying pop-up at the top of your BigQuery UI that's going to say you're in Sandbox. You can upgrade to an actual billing account. When you do actually upgrade to a billing account, we can see here on the right, you will still keep some of the Sandbox advantages. So you still get the first 10 gigabytes per month free. You still get the first terabyte of data to query every month for free. And on top of that, you get a gigabyte of free capacity of BI engine, so a caching layer for Data Studio or now Looker Studio reports. You can also create ML models. I believe there is a limit of 10 gigabytes of data processed when you're training a new model. So with billing account, you still get quite a bit of things for free. And then on top of that, you can go basically into infinity or whatever Google servers will allow you. And if we look on the next slide, this becomes then the actual cost. So that data transfer from Google Analytics to BigQuery daily is still free. However, you will pay for streaming if you do turn it on. So that's that intraday data that comes to BigQuery within a few seconds. That cost is 5 cents per gigabyte of data streamed. Compared to Universal Analytics, it's a lot more efficient. There's no duplicated data. You don't have to run an additional view on top of the data that's being streamed. You can basically directly plug in and start querying that data. You'll have a storage cost, which will be based on the amount of data stored. So generally, we're used to seeing it as 2 cents per gigabyte per month for data that is 90 days or younger, or any data that's older than that, it will be 1 cent per gigabyte per month. That's long-term logical storage. Google has started advertising this recently, and with July 5th, I believe it's going to become even easier available through editions. But there's a physical storage as well that you can opt in. So this is just the physical storage for billing purposes. In reality, both are stored the same way in the backend. But you'll notice that Google Analytics data can be very well compressed. Once it's exported, it usually does not change. So the amount of physical data, physical storage that it takes is usually about 10 times smaller than what we see with logical storage. What that means is that you can have quite a bit of savings there as well. So even though the cost is, you can see, double, you have a lot less storage in terms of how much you're being charged for. So you can potentially find quite a bit of savings there. And then when it comes to analysis and querying data, if you have a pay-as-you-go for data scanned, you'll be charged at the moment $5 per terabyte. On July 5th, that's going to jump to $6.25. And then on the other hand, you can also turn on BigQuery editions, which at the lowest rate start at about 3.6 hours per month, and then go up to about $3.6 per hour for 100 slots of BigQuery editions. And then that goes up to about $10, depending on the level of editions. If you go from Enterprise to, let's say, Enterprise Plus, and your commitment. So you can have no commitment and just use this basically on a minute basis, or you can push it and have a year commitment or even a 3-year commitment for your BigQuery editions. On top of that, what's great with BigQuery, is still on the right, is there's really no maintenance. So it's a fully managed infrastructure. Everything's in a cloud. you don't need to hire a person to look over your servers to make sure that everything's running, that everything's online. This is all managed by Google. You can use your existing Google account, probably the same one you're using for your Google Analytics already. There are really good cost controls for BigQuery specifically. So for the amount of data scanned, for example, you can limit that per user per day. You can also have a higher limit for your project to make sure that none of your queries run into, at larger amounts of money that you would want to see spend. Yeah, so no need for database admin, database engineers. Everything is fully managed. So no extra resources needed. All you can focus on is basically your data and starting to access it and querying it. And let's look at complexity. How hard is it to turn on and how difficult the data itself looks like. So setting up the export is basically 3 quick steps. Each of them takes about a minute, maybe 2. So first, you'll have to create a GCP project, which you'll just go to cloud.google.com, and it's going to lead you there, and you'll be able to create your first Google Cloud project. And in there, if you want to, you can connect it to a billing, or you can opt to go with Sandbox. There's also a trial version usually where they give you $300 to use for free before you start committing to anything more. So that's a very quick process. Just basically Google Cloud, and you'll be able to set one up. And once you're in it, to turn on the Google Analytics export, you'll want to add a new user to it. So that's the Analytics user. It's a Google Analytics user that basically allows transfer of data, someone who has access to GA4, and on the other hand, to your project. So it's going to look like this generic email that you'll add, but basically that generic email just allows your Google Analytics 4 data to be written into your project. So that's the second step. And then the third step is you'll have to flip the switch in your Google Analytics UI in your GA4 admin settings. So there's already a little BigQuery link, a link that you have in there, and you'll just click on it. And within it, you'll be able to select streams. You'll specify which project ID you want this to be exported to. And then you can also select things like location of the data set if there are any privacy concerns. So you can say, I want all my data in US or in EU, for example. So the export itself is turned on pretty quick, 3 steps, and you're done. When it comes to schema, compared to Universal Analytics, I would say it's simplified. You can start writing queries very quickly with it. Every row now is an event, which means there's a lot less nesting happening, nesting or repeated fields. So right now, event parameters would be a repeated field because we're never sure at how many there will be for each event. You can create your own custom event parameters, or there are some predefined ones, and even with those, it's not always the same number. So instead of putting them in columns, we just have a repeated row within it that consists of the key and value. And you can just see here on the right of the image, we have event parameter key for gclid and GA session ID, for example. So that's the first repeated field. The second repeated fields would be items. So anything that pertains e-commerce, and maybe there's a page impression with multiple items. Again, the same reason, you can have as many items in your event or in your cart or in your purchase. So that's not a column again, but it's a repeated field. Items come with a lot of their own columns as well, a lot of attributes that describe them. And then we have the third repeated field, which is user properties. Again, same structure as with event parameters. We have key and value. There are no multi-level nestings like we were used to in Universal Analytics. Universal Analytics, for example, had the root, and then within it, which would be sessions, and then you would have hits, and then you could have products within hits, and then within products you could have product scope, custom dimensions. So suddenly you're like 3 levels deep, and it can get very complex. I believe in this sense, this schema is a little more simplified. It's geared towards an event versus the previous schema that was geared towards a session. The column groups are pretty much the same. So we have events, anything that describe events. So we see event date, event time, state, event name, for example. We have information about user, information about device, like device category, browser, language, etc. We got geo all the way down to city, app information, if it's tracking that's based on the app. We got traffic source information. That one's a little tricky now. So the traffic source that natively comes as a column is actually the acquisition traffic source, and not the traffic source of that session. However, within the event, we also have traffic source information. Just on the example here in the picture, you can see there's a Google Click ID present. And then e-commerce data is another group that we have as well. And what's really nice is there are updates being done in the future, and we'll look into that as well, that are probably going to make some of these things even easier. When we go to the next slide. So with the simplified schema, and let's say that you don't have your export going on yet and you want to learn more about it, or you want to try to run some queries before you commit to actually exporting your own data, there is a public data set for Google Analytics 4 available. It's a data from Google's merchandise store. And in there, it has about a month or 2 months of, or actually 3 months of GA data. Then you can start querying pretty much immediately. So you would just create your Google Cloud project, go into BigQuery, and then all you need to do is query that data set from BigQuery public data. That data is accessible to anyone. You can just plug it into your UI, into your query, click run, and you'll start seeing data from it. When it comes to limitations, again, if you're in Sandbox, there's a terabyte of data that you can query, but this data set is significantly smaller. So you should be able to run quite a few queries before you'd start incurring any cost. We can jump on the next slide. And now, one of the biggest limitations that we see, or hesitations, it's knowing SQL. So even when you have BigQuery Export, and even though it's a SQL language database, you don't necessarily need to know SQL to use it. And so here's an example of integration with Looker Studio. It's free integration. Data Studio or Looker Studio is free. It's a very quick connection. You'll select BigQuery as your source and select your events table. Looker Studio actually has some recognition of data that's in BigQuery for GA4 specifically, so it will pre-build some of the metrics and dimensions, and you can see even when data source, it knows automatically year, month, day are the endings of your, the date is the ending of your daily export events tables. And everything in there is then drag and drop. So you see a dimension, you see a metric, you can just drag it over to your chart. You select what chart you would like to see. The same goes with metric. So no SQL necessary. What's really, really cool about it is in your project, however, where the project that's running your queries, likely where your data is stored, you can see these queries that Looker Studio is building. So in some extent, you could almost use this as a visual SQL builder if you wanted to. It's just a great way to maybe learn SQL if you're starting with it, to see what's happening in the background. Those are of course a little specific to how Looker Studio wants to see them, but it gives you a really good sense of what is happening in the background and how simple basically some of these can be. Another big advantage of connecting in this case from Looker Studio to BigQuery, is avoiding Google Analytics API limits. Although luckily it sounds like those have recently been increased quite a bit. So there's not as many issues around those, but still, if you do not want to hit any limits, if you want your data completely unsampled, exporting to BigQuery and then connecting to BigQuery is the best way to go. And again, as I mentioned, you can use Sandbox and free tier. So this is an example for Looker Studio, but let's say if you're using Tableau or Power BI, you can just as easily connect to your BigQuery export as well. And let's go to the next slide. And when you do decide to start writing queries, like I showed you with the schema, those get to be pretty quick and easy. So there's a quick example here where we're looking at the number of rows. So if we just do count star, the number of rows is now the number of events. You can take advantage of event name being present right there. And if you just go with event name equals page view and count the number of rows again, that's going to give you the number of page views. Session start is now like a system event that always gets added. So even though each row is not a session anymore like it was in a universal analytics, it's still very easy to count the number of sessions because we have a session start event at the beginning of each session. So if we say event name equals session start, we get the number of sessions. And then for the number of users, depending on your tracking, very likely you're just taking advantage of the user pseudo ID, or in the universal analytics, that would be, let's say, a client ID. You can just count distinct values of user pseudo ID to get the number of users. If you're using user ID and sending that information to Google Analytics 4, that's present in your export as well. So you could just do count distinct user ID and count the number of users that you have. There are quite a few blog posts on our website pertaining that and how to start from very little and start making your queries more and more complex. So there's a whole page dedicated to just the BigQuery export guide. And then we have, I think, 2 or 3 posts now that guide you from starting very easy and then touching different problems within the export that you want to tackle. And all the SQL is available and some of the thought process behind it as well. So definitely, if this is any of the worry, I just be encouraged, go on our website and you can start learning pretty quickly. And on the next slide, we'll touch just quickly with BigQuery, what you get to is BigQuery ML. I always like to mention that because it gives you very easy access to machine learning. And then with your data in there, it allows you to start very quickly using it into more than just, we started with visualizations, then we jumped into writing our own SQL, and now actually adding ML to that raw data as well. You don't need to export this data anywhere. You can start running BigQuery machine learning queries within the UI very quickly. So an example here on the right is actually from the documentation. There's a tutorial that Google has that is creating a matrix factorization, and it's looking at content that we think a user should have recommended based on what articles that they've already read, and in this case, the amount of time that they've spent on historical articles. So we have a big table of your users, and then maybe pages that they've seen, amount of time that they've spent on those pages. And then based on that, it's starting to give recommendations on what other articles that users should see based on, everyone's history and everyone's time on those pages. So it takes just a few lines of code to come up with something like that, whereas in the past, you would have to export that raw data, probably work with it in a Python notebook or maybe R, and maybe import data back and somehow start using it. Now everything can be done quickly in BigQuery, and in this case, a little more advanced SQL. So you can see how it fits really all stages. You can start with NoSQL, which is Data Studio reports, and then you can start learning SQL with that data, basically with very simple queries. And at the end, you can actually do machine learning with your data within BigQuery, which is a pretty awesome feature. And I quickly wanted to squeeze in this at the end. There are new features on the horizon. So I was mentioning schema earlier. So that schema pertains to the daily export table. And with Universal Analytics in GA4 so far, we've only been used to a single table that had all the events and all the sessions data. So now Google Analytics 4 will be giving us a new user export table. And that user, from their descriptions, will look like this. So each row will be a user. And for that user, we'll have audience information, we'll have user custom dimensions, there will be some lifetime value and predicted values along with that as well. And from what I understand, if there are any changes to the user, that data will get exported again, so that you'll always be able to have access to the most recent information about each user. And recently, schema has also gotten collected traffic source field that is not yet getting populated. So if you already have the export turned on, you can see that there's a new field available. And apparently that will start populating with event traffic source, so we don't have to maybe access it in event parameters anymore. And on the outer schema, we don't only see the traffic source, which is actually the acquisition traffic source. So even if it's user's 10th session, that data is only showing us how the user was acquired or information from their very first session. And yeah, that's about it. So I'll pass it back to you, Sandra.
Okay, hey, I just want to note that we have some resources that are available to you. Thinking about how to make Google Analytics your source of truth. We've got an overview guide on Google Analytics 4. We've also got an on-demand webinar about Google Analytics for you, getting started with BigQuery. And then also a quick overview on the BigQuery Export. With that, I'm going to pause here and just remind you, we've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to take a few, about 5 minutes. I've got a couple of questions here that I wanted to make sure that we covered. So Emmilly, Luka, if y'all would be kind enough to step up when these are things that you can answer. The first is specifically, does Adswerve support other digital analytics solutions? And they specifically mentioned Amplitude, Mixpanel, Heap, Kissmetrics, Pendo, and Glassbox.
So Adobe would be the big one, the one that's not mentioned. I think currently we're mostly focused on Adobe and Google Analytics. I know we've specialized in other ones in the past, so we can help with something like a transition, but our primary focus is on Google Analytics and Adobe Analytics.
Yep, Luka, and to add to that too, I mean, I think every day we're working on partnerships, right? So I know that Amplitude is something that we are building up a practice for as well. And then I think just various consultants on our side have touched these different products. So maybe we don't have an official partnership, but we do have experience with these products or similar products and can kind of get to a solution based on what we already know.
That's great. We have a lot of questions, and I think they've all been answered about when things will become available in GA4 and available to BigQuery. So I hope those have been answered. If they didn't get answered, please poke again for that. Here's another one. What's the best connector to bring BigQuery data into an internal data warehouse?
Yeah, so that will depend on the internal data warehouse where it is, and usually, and how quickly you want your data there. Usually the native way would be to export data into Google Cloud Storage, and then from there to just grab it. Again, it depends on your data warehouse, but you can do that export as a JSON, as an Avro, as a Parquet. There are different ways of exporting it to there. So Google will do the job for you, and then you just grab it from Google Cloud Storage. There are also, BigQuery also has a storage API, which allows you to very quickly transfer that data. So again, depends on what you're using, but I would probably start with more Google native solutions before, paying a subscription to a service that will be doing the same job.
Thank you very much. Another question was about the CRO testing functionality in GA4. With Optimize being sunset later this year, does GA4 have a planned built-in release for CRO anytime soon?
Yeah, I can answer that one. I know that they've come out with a few integrations with some big CRO partners already. So that's kind of how GA4 is going to address the sunset of Optimize. We've also been talking to clients about other options as well. One of them is Adobe Target, if that makes sense for you. That's a good option, but really it's kind of open right now to determining what you want to use next in terms of a tool and what's important for you as a feature. If it's a product that has an integration with GA4, great. If it's something else that you need in the product, it might be one that doesn't have an integration.
Okay. One question that has not been answered about the WinWills that is in the Q&A. I'm going to end on this question. Do you know when we're going to have user source and medium in a real-time report? Right now, it's just first user.
Yeah, so I think this has to do with the BigQuery export probably. So some of the information for the intraday export is already available in the event parameters. So you may have a key that's medium, campaign, and so on. So you should be able to grab some of the information from there. I do not know when Google will actually start populating those fields that I described earlier. I believe they publicly said it's coming soon somewhere. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
So our best answer is soon. Okay, we are at time, and I know that there are a few other questions in here. We'll get these questions, so if you have those and you want to get those answered, just kind of keep an eye out on some of our blog posts, that sort of thing. I noticed that there's a lot of different things that people have referred you to in these questions. If you have any questions about the stuff that we have covered, we are going to send out the recording and a PDF of these slides, since there were a lot of links in the slides, to everyone who registered for this webinar. So you'll be able to take a look and reach out to us directly if you have anything else that you want. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Luka. You did a great job. I'm thrilled with everything that is here. And please come back and talk to us again. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day or evening.
Thank you.
Bye.